All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the May 13th, 2021 meeting of the Fulton County Board of Registrations and Elections. I'm Alex Wan. I'm the chair of the board, and we are joined by my colleagues, Mr. Mark Wingate, Dr. Kathleen Ruth, and Mr. Aaron Johnson. This constitutes a quorum, and this meeting is officially called to order. We're also joined now by our Madam Vice Chair, Vernetta Keith Nuridin, as well. We're supported by our staff, Mr. Richard Barron, as well as our Board Secretary, Mariska Bodison. With that, I should also add that we are conducting this teleconference meeting as authorized pursuant to Section 50-14-1G of the Official Code of Georgia because of the public health state of emergency declared by Governor Kemp on March 15, 2020, and it was renewed through April 30th of 2021. I'm not sure of the exact status of that right now. We will be talking about subsequent meetings later in the agenda, pursuant to which public meeting spaces in state and local government have been closed due to COVID-19, and because means have been afforded for the public to have simultaneous access to this teleconference. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Approval of the agenda. Colleagues, are there any changes or amendments to the agenda as it's been presented in the board packet? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Motion by Madam Chair. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Johnson. All in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That motion carries by unanimously. Next item on the agenda is communications and public response. Ms. Bodison, do we have anybody signed up to provide comments from the public?
I have Bridget Thorne.
Please, all right. Ms. Thorne, please proceed.
Dear Fulton board members, we have just finished a contentious election cycle. The Fulton County Supervisor of Elections was fired in a bipartisan vote by this nonpartisan board, and then firing was overturned by the Board of Commissioners. Now a board member, Mr. Aaron Johnson, is working and paid by an elected official. He is serving as Nekima Williams District Director. On the outside, employment by an elected official could be looked as a reward by that elected official, or it could be a way of gaining influence in the election process. As a member of this board, Mr. Johnson is in a position of authority over elections that could benefit his employer either directly or indirectly. For instance, as a board member, would you have influence to make sure you get one of those 8 drop boxes placed in your employer's district? Would a board member have influence with Richard Barron's office? Did Mr. Johnson vote to not terminate Mr. Barron simply to maintain influence for himself and Nekima? I am no way accusing Mr. Johnson of malfeasance, but it casts doubt that he can effectively and objectively make decisions as a member of this board while being paid by an elected official. In your last meeting, Mr. Johnson stated, "As I have taken a position in not a political office, not in a candidate's office, but in a government office, I think there's a distinct line between the two," end quote. According to the House website, that is simply not true. Each member of Congress has a staff to assist him or her during their term in office. Quote, "The House is not a single employing entity, but rather consists of several hundred individual employing offices. Each House office is an independent employer and responsible for the candidate screening, interviewing, and selection, as well as job requirements, compensation, and conditions of employment. Mr. Johnson would not have his job if Nekima Williams is not reelected. This is a direct conflict of interest and casts more doubt on the integrity of the election process."
Ms. Thorne.
Thank you. Sorry for going over.
Thank you, Ms. Thorne. Other commenters?
Mr. Nance,
Please proceed. Thank you. Mr. Nance, please proceed.
Yes, I just wanted to express my support for what Bridget just said, and I think that we should really consider that seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Nance. Ms. Bodison, who's next, please?
that concludes public comment.
Thank you very much. With that, we move on to the next item on the agenda under old business, approval of the minutes. First item up is regular meeting, April 15th to 2021. Colleagues, I trust you've had a chance to review them. I don't know if anybody has any additions or corrections. I do have one. I'm trying to. So colleagues, in the section where we were discussing the amendments to the bylaw, specifically regarding the topic of employment by a government official, there was a section that was credited to me on page, on page 13 of the board packet. Towards the bottom, it says Chairman Wan, as a former federal employee for 14 years. That was not me. So I believe that those first, that section or that first sentence.
Yeah, that was me. That was,
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Okay.
So that should be Kathleen there.
Okay. All right.
no problem.
All right. So if someone could offer up an amendment to change that and just to credit that one line to Dr. Ruth, please.
So moved.
All right, there's a motion from Mr. Johnson to amend. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Madam Vice Chair. If there's no further, are there any other changes or corrections to the minutes? Okay, if not, then we'll handle this. All right, motion to amend is on the floor. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the minutes have been amended. Now I need a motion to approve the minutes as amended for the April meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Johnson, second.
Second.
Seconded by Madam Vice Chair. If there's no further discussion on the motion to approve as amended, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that motion carries. The next item are the minutes from the executive session, which I don't believe.
Mr. Chair, I was going to ask about that. That generally comes from the chair.
And I do not have those, and I did not provide those to the board. My apologies. So with that, we'll have to push this one off to the next meeting, and I will make sure I get those to you before our June meeting. My apologies for missing that protocol there. Okay, before I do move on though, I wasn't sure, also speaking of protocols, we had a special call meeting at the beginning of May to handle the work session. Do we typically have minutes or at least some sort of record of the proceedings of that?
That will come in the June meeting. So as a standard, I'm not saying that it's proper protocol. As a standard, anything that happens within that month will follow in the following month.
Okay.
So,
All right. Very good. Thank you, Ms. Bodison. So at our June meeting, we'll have the minutes or the recap from our work session, as well as the executive session minutes from April 15th.
And today's meeting, yes.
Today's, yes. So, all right. All right, if there are no other comments on the minutes section, we'll move on to the monthly operations report for April. I'll turn it over to our director, Mr. Rick Barron.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
For November 2nd, it looks like Atlanta Public Schools and Fulton County Schools is going to add an East Loss to the ballot. So we're gonna have to revise the municipal budget for the November general, in order to account for the costs that will be incurred by the two school districts. We're attempting to find alternate locations for polling precincts with active voters over 5,000. And we will have, and for any also additional locations that have declined to be polling places going forward. We will be presenting those to the board at the June meeting. We have approximately 16 at this point that we are going to bring to you. That number could change between now and the June meeting. As we went over last time, all of our check-in locations, most of them are changing. We have some, we are increasing those to 7 from 5. And I think that'll make election night more efficient. And once we get some more guidance from the Secretary of State on what will happen on election night, we'll be able to redo the training for those check-in stations as well. Advanced voting locations are being reserved right now. We're working to ensure those are going to be evenly distributed throughout the county as normal, and a map of proposed locations will be presented to the board at the June meeting. Senate Bill 202, of course, will reduce our absentee ballot drop boxes to 8 from 38. We are also confirming with legal that we do not have to place boxes at the elections offices, which is the Government Center, South Annex, and North Annex, since we will have staff on site at those locations during business hours to receive ballots. We will include training for the advanced voting managers on absentee ballot drop box procedures. A map of those locations. We do have one map currently, but we've got together with GIS over the last week, and they have mapped out approximately how many within a certain radius each one of those 8 boxes will service. And they are recommending that we move 2 of them, one more farther to the southeast and one more to the east, in order to even out the number. And then we will bring those to the board at the June meeting. Nadine is actually trying to get a new map prepared by GIS before the meeting ends today to send to you. If GIS can do it, then we'll get it to you before the end of the meeting. So you'll have it ahead of June. We are revising all the class curriculums to ensure that SB 202 procedures are included and awaiting SOS guidance on procedures. And they also have to make final new forms. A virtual demo is being scheduled with Knowing to implement electronic fee schedules and procedures to expedite poll worker payroll. And that will be helpful going forward, especially on election night, in order to start processing payroll on that night rather than having to wait until we collect everything in the day or 2 after election day. We have conducted supply and equipment inventory. We're currently placing orders for equipment and getting quotes on other equipment for needs for next year, so we don't have any overlaps between advanced voting training and election day. SB 202 has made our mobile voting units obsolete. However, we will use those for voter education. We have also, and voter education will be handled directly by the new deputy director. We have chosen a deputy director, and once that is made final, we will let the board know who we are hiring for that position. With regard to registration, you can see that the number of voter registration applications have continued to stay low. They are more in line with the years 2013, 2014. We only received 6,751 total applications for this year. Through April, only 32,835. In past years, we were hitting that number usually by mid-February. And that is because there has been a change to the way DDS is sending applications to us now. As of May 1st, we had 859,902 registered voters. 37,311 of those are inactive. And then we also mailed 255 letters to voters who are suspected felons. If they don't respond, they will be removed from the rolls. The municipal voter file has been sent to each municipality, and they have a deadline of July 2nd to return those to us with any changes once they finish auditing those. We identified a number of addresses to be non-residential addresses or mailboxes. We have found 1,280 of those. We sent a letter on April 6th to ask the voters to update their voter information according to advice of the county attorney's office. If we do not hear from those voters, the voters that we did not hear from will be scheduled for a hearing today and during this meeting. And we will make, the board will have to make a determination on their status going forward as to whether they'll be registered voters. And we have to submit 555 randomly selected absentee ballots we did by April 16th to the SOS for University of Georgia researchers. They're doing a signature match audit for all of the counties in the state. The 2020 primary and runoff election double voters, we completed that for the Secretary of State, and we mailed those. They are going to determine whether those voters, based on what we sent to them, actually are double voters, and we reported all of those findings to the Secretary of State. With regard to the admin division, we continue to have the department supervisors meeting weekly. County manager's strategy team meets weekly. We have been doing municipal election reviews. We have purchasing meetings weekly and HR liaisons update meeting as well. As I said before, we will be resubmitting the elections budget for the November election because of the eSPLOST, and the admin division takes care of all of the budgets for our office. We have the registration manager was posted. Those interviews will be happening shortly. Voter education and outreach manager, that's a newly funded position, and we will, that should be posted soon. And we have chosen a candidate, and an offer is being tendered to the deputy director. The Fulton County Auditing Department is reviewing our finances for 2020, and we are providing almost at least once a week, if not more, backups to all of the spending that was done in 2020. And we do not have a conclusion date to that yet, but it is underway. And that is what I have for the operations report. And I can either answer questions or direct those to appropriate staff.
All right, questions for Mr. Barron. Mr. Wingate, please, and then Mr. Johnson.
Yes, Director, one of the things, I mean, it's very difficult, at least for me to, in terms of our statistics each month. One of the things, though, that frankly did pop up is the number that is being reported as moved out of state. I'll give you what I believe that I saw and come back and compiling everything, all of the monthly reports in 2020. But a handful were reported as being listed as moved out of state. I think if I may have made a mistake, but I think when I look back at that, there were 5 total in 2020, which is, a major election year. In looking at what has been compiled so far in 2021, statistically, so far to this point that we're sitting here now, there have been 16 reported as moved out of state. Now, again, I fully admit, I don't look at these stats, I don't compile these stats, but it just seems to me in our community, that number just doesn't make a lot of sense. And when I go back and I take a look at what your current process is in terms of file management or list management, you report that this is being updated or maintained daily. And that covers all of the in and out of county voter transitions, as well as the out of state move transition. So again, I'm not making any accusation here, just in terms of looking at that, statistically, it doesn't make any sense to me.
What I'll do, I'll have Ralph, the state is part of ERIC, and what I'll have Ralph do is explain how we are notified with regard to out-of-state voters and how other states notify the Secretary of State that voters have moved to other states and how that process works. Part of the thing of which I'm aware is that if we do get notified that a voter has been matched from out of state, we have to then try to verify which registration came last. And if it's the one in Georgia, then they stay on the rolls. If it is these, none of the voter registration systems between the states are integrated. So we rely on getting that information from other states, or we rely on the actual voter notifying us that they moved out of state. Ralph, do you want to go through that process?
Sure. Good morning, board. What usually happens is that we receive some sort of documentation from the state that tells us that the voter has registered in another state. Once upon receiving those documentation, we will update the file as noted once we receive it from the Secretary of State. Unless the voter actually contacts us directly, we have no way of knowing. So all the information is either given directly from the voter, or if a person registered to vote on their application and they stated that their last address was out of state, usually the Secretary of State of that usually the Secretary of State of that state will actually send that notification over to the other Secretary of States, and then the Secretary of States will send it to the counties. So it's communications between the Secretary of State if a voter registers. For example, like if a person registers in Fulton County and they are, their old registration was from Tennessee. Once we enter that information into the system, the Secretary of State of Georgia will actually send that information over to Tennessee for them to remove them off of their roll. It works the same way. So if a person registers in Florida and they have indicated that their last address was in Georgia, then the Secretary of State in Florida will send it to Georgia, whereby Georgia would then disperse it to the counties. That's how that process works.
And Ralph, the communication between the states is imperfect because many of them do not subscribe to those interstate cross checks, right? Isn't that correct?
Yes. A lot of states do not subscribe to it, but the Secretary of State now is putting some procedures in place for us for the communication between the states. You should see that number grow a little bit more because of Senate Bill 202 and ERIC, so that we can get some definition on cross-state references.
Well, from several past communications and discussions on this, what I'm hearing stated is that somewhere in the process here, that the utilization of NCOA is really not in play then. Statistically, folks, it just doesn't make any sense. If this is all the changes that we're making to our voter registration list in terms of those citizens, Fulton voters that have moved out of state, that, you know, so far this year that we statistically know, that has been 16 voters. I mean, I'm just going by what's being reported. Again, I'm not challenging, I'm just saying statistically, it doesn't make any sense. So
the last time the state ran NCOA was in 2019.
Okay.
And they will run it this year. Ralph can probably give you an average of the statistics of the number that are going to be reduced off our rolls, but it's probably going to be in the neighborhood of 30 to 40,000 once NCOA is run, and we will probably see inactive voters counts go down about 10,000 and the active voter count going down the remaining. But
let me ask you, Director, what, because you're closer to this than any of us is, why then has the SOS not run this list, particularly as it would have related to 2020?
Well, I can answer that one.
Okay.
Usually NCOA can only be run during a certain time because in the even years, there's a statute that says that we cannot change people's status. So therefore, the NCOA process actually changes voter statuses. That's why we run it during the odd years. If a person does not respond to a confirmation letter, their status can be removed from active to inactive. And the way the statute is read is that before in a major elections, it's prohibited for those NCOAs to be run.
Well, Chief, we did, as you well know, we did run into that in 2020 with a registration list challenge. And it was deemed that that was inside the parameters of when changes could not be made. But that was like, if memory serves me correct, from the last, from the 2020 election, that cutoff was sometime around August the 1st. It was a 90-day or so period prior to a federal election. But that doesn't, to me, and help us understand why, that has nothing to do with the balance of 2020, particularly when it's critical, I think, in a lot of people's minds, that we're in a, not only a presidential election year, but in, a huge federal election year. And to say that we cannot, in that scope of time, which is several months of 2020, correct across the board and across the states where voters should be legally voting. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but as one knucklehead out here, and in my case, a Fulton County voter as well, it makes no sense that if those tools are available,
then I think last year
that they're not being utilized. And I'm not, I'm just saying, if that is something that needs to be directed at the SOS, fine. But I don't have any problem in directing that to the SOS.
And we can reach out to the SOS because they actually start to function up. We're subjected to when they actually run the NCOAs. And we can reach out to them to determine when the next time they are submitting that job in order to perform that function.
Well, I appreciate you doing that, Chief. And the other thing too is you all are working back through, which hopefully is going to be some revisions to your list management functions. Do please take off in terms of that transfers in and out of county and out of state. That is not daily maintained, obviously.
Well, the reason why we say it's daily maintained is as soon as we get it, we go ahead and perform the duties. Especially within county. Within county is the registering of voters. We register voters every day. So transferring in and out becomes a daily routine.
Yeah, I'm not, yeah, and Chief, again, quite frankly, I am not, certainly trying to minimize the level of activity to maintain all of this. I'm just saying as we go through and hopefully are going through a process here to evaluate, audit, and make sure that we're totally accurate in how we're depicting how we maintain any of this stuff. That if there are exceptions, as you have just stated to this, let's just make sure they're clear, in any forward documentation that we're doing. Because for, even people like me, when I read a written word, I kind of take that as the way it's supposed to be done. So I hear what you're saying about the maintain daily definition. So that obviously is not the case. I'm just asking, from my own right, that we make sure that that's clarified as we go forward.
And I think for 2020, one of the other things is that we had, we originally had a March federal election, and then it was moved to May, and then it was moved to June. And then we had another August. We had August, September, November, December, and January federal elections. So there was a really large window of time where we were unable to change status of voters, and more so last year than any other time. And it started because of that March election, the 90 days within the March election, and then that one was moved to May. And so it basically blocked out 2020 with regard to NCOA.
Well, that's interesting. I guess, Director, that's the first time, at least that to my ears, that I've heard that the moratorium on that change also included presidential primaries.
Yeah, because it's for all those federal elections.
So no matter what, if in any case, in any state, if there is a federal oriented component to an election, that so-called 90-day moratorium prior to is in force. Is that what you're indicating?
Yeah. Well, Ralph, do you have something to add?
I would just say, I think that the Secretary of State views that as a window that they probably don't want to tamper with. And on their judgment, they prefer not to run it during even years.
Yeah, and even numbered years, it becomes more problematic for them to run it. And so that's usually why. And sometimes I believe, and Ralph can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they've run it more than once in an odd numbered year before.
That is correct. They try to run it multiple times during the odd years.
All right, so 2021, the year that we're presently in, I would then make an assumption this is a gigantic cleanup year, for our files. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
Yes, I think that, as I said, the Secretary of State usually runs the confirmation process during the odd years, and they try to get as many of them in as possible.
They will run a no activity. They'll run an NCOA. So we should see a rather large number coming off at some point this year. But as far as I've been told right now, I haven't read that we've received notification that NCOA is going to be run or when it's going to be run.
Well, to that point, will Eric replace NCOA, or is it all going to be utilized?
We have not gotten any instructions on the state in regards to that one. I suspect that they will continue running NCOAs with Eric.
All right, well, I've taken up enough of your time with this. I just, again, plead with you all that as we go forward in this process, bring in outside resources, that let's just get this correct. So, for crying out loud, we don't continue to have this running at us, into the future, albeit that I won't probably be around, going into that realm. But nevertheless, for the Fulton County voters, let's just pledge to ourselves that we get this all correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wingate. Mr. Johnson.
Good morning. Just a couple of quick questions. On the municipal voter files, just for clarification, the municipal voter file cleanup where you send it out to each municipality and they go through it, this is simply just going through and making sure the addresses are correct and it has nothing to do with actual voters, correct?
Yes, that is correct. But one of the things that we ask the municipalities to take a look at is that if you know that the address is a faulty address, could you let us know so that then after that we can go through the hearing process?
Okay.
So that's something else that we would ask the municipality to do. Any information that they can give us to help us clean up our list as far as bad addresses would help us greatly.
And then additionally, it'll help as it relates to who's in what district, because, you know, Fulton County moves around a lot when it comes to municipal lines. So that'll help us out as well. But it's all done in our office. The cities themselves don't do that, correct?
Yes, the city actually gives us the file with the updates, and then we make the changes in our office.
But it'll be done. Okay. All right. So that is one. The street file, well, I'll actually save that for later in the agenda. But to the double voting, really quick, I was looking at the chart. I thought that there were safeguards that if I voted early, because one of the things that I saw in the report is there is a contention that people voted early in person, and correct me if I'm wrong, they voted early in person and then came on election day. There's allegations that that happened. I thought that we had safeguards so that I voted early and then I showed up on election day, in the system, it should show that I voted already.
My understanding, yes, it is. But if you notice that in June, the numbers were very, very skewed. And in June, we had a lot of new poll workers. And that polls, is a possibility, you know, that they might not have done due diligence at that time. So, but there are safeguards in place to identify every voter who has either voted or has received an absentee application at the polls. And then the poll manager doing their instructions is supposed to go through the criteria in order to allow a person to vote.
Okay. All right. Can we get it? Well, we're going to get a report as to what the results are from this.
As soon as we know, we'll let you know.
All right. Thank you. That's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Other questions from my colleagues? Dr. Ruth, please.
Yes, as it relates to the double voting, there wasn't anything in January. So was there any double voting that you know of in January?
There was, the state just gave us a list about late last week, and I think it was around 20 voters that we have to take a look at.
Okay.
21.
Okay, and also as it relates to the UGA results from the audit, when do you expect that to be, the results to be available to the board?
The state has not responded anything to that particular one. We're waiting to hear from the state at this particular time about that.
They're doing all of the counties. So I think it may take them a little time to go through all of those.
Okay, and as it relates to the training, so I understand that there's going to be a revamp of the training for poll workers. And do you have have you thought about hiring a curricula writer for that, or how is that going to be managed or done?
Well, we're part of the RFP process the RFP that's going out today, that we will consult with them on that. Currently, we're working on the aspects of training that we know that we can change. As we get more direction on SB 202 from the state, we will make further revisions. And then once that the vendor is chosen with regard to the RFP, they will also consult with us on that. I've also talked to a couple of people about getting some volunteers in to have poll workers that we have go through some of what we rewrite, to have them evaluate it so that to see how they understand it, and then maybe do some sample trainings as well.
Okay, I would just ask that you keep the board abreast of that. That's such an important part of elections, is training our poll workers, making sure that they have more than adequate training. So thank you.
Dr. Ruth, other questions or comments? At this point, all right, Mr. Barron, you want to proceed with the monthly report?
That concludes the monthly report if there are no other questions.
All right, before we move off of that, I wanted to, let me go back and circle. There were some questions that Mr. Wingate had posed or raised that I wanted to make sure we got covered during the monthly report. The first one has to do with the budget item for Happy Faces, the $7.8 billion budget request going forward. And I think Mr. Wingate had a request that we get some details on that expenditure request.
That is a not to exceed, and what that includes is a not to exceed for the entire year, and that will be for that includes not only expenses that are currently we are incurring, but also because we do have some supplemental staff on board, and as well as the November election and the December election. So once per year, we go to the DOC and we ask for a not to exceed amount, and they authorize a certain amount of spending that we can have through that vendor. Happy Faces is a state contract vendor. Usually purchasing goes through and they will evaluate some of the other vendors that are on the state contract. Most of the vendors that have responded to us don't have the bandwidth to, they don't have the ability to supply the number of workers that we need. And therefore, Happy Faces has continued to win the contract annually because of that. And in fact, some of the other vendors that we did use last year because we needed more people, usually if the other vendors had no shows or were unable, Happy Faces was able to fill those slots for us. So in essence, it's just a not to exceed amount for the year.
Mr. Wingate, did you want to ask more questions about this?
No, I appreciate that response, Director. Now this so-called 7.8 million that was put on the table to the BOC, that I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, they tabled for further review that 7.8 million number.
Oh, yes. Well, what we did was put in, like, because last year we had so many, I guess we used more temporary staff last year than at any other time. So we wanted to make sure we asked Dick Anderson, the county manager, if we could get all of our procedures in place on how we make sure that we request staff and have those procedures in place before we address the BOC at the next meeting. So they tabled it to the following meeting.
Okay. Lastly, what period does that cover, that 7.8 billion proposed?
2021.
Just 2021.
Yeah.
So that means that for this year, that $7.8 million is needed for just the municipal elections?
That's for the municipal elections, and it's also currently for supplemental staff that we have on board right now as well. And so it's all of 2021.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, the next item he had raised was the consultant agreement and the RFP. I actually had a question about that, and in reviewing it, I'm curious as to who is deemed the kind of project manager from the county side. That wasn't readily clear to me when I was reading through it. Basically, you know, who the final deliverable is given to at the end. Because I saw references to the county manager. I would imagine it would have been to you or perhaps to the.
I will be responsible for that, and I'll work. The deputy director and I will work with the consultant on that, making sure that the final deliverables are completed for that project.
Okay, so you essentially are the client, the end user client of this particular work. Correct?
Yes, and then that's purchasing indicated to us that that'll go out at noon today.
Okay. All right. The other just observation I had too was while I saw the projects were broken up into 3 phases, I was kind of surprised that phase 3 wasn't the first, and that one had to do with org structure and staffing. I would have thought that that would have been kind of
that. You know what, we made adjustments to that, and well, let me see if I can pull the RFP up. Hold on. We made a couple final adjustments to that. I need to search for the document.
I mean, that quite frankly was more of an observation than anything. And if you in the final version have shifted that around, then that's great. But I don't think that's a showstopper.
I think that we changed a few items between phase 3 and phase 1.
Okay.
And I believe that if I remember correctly, in phase 3, that I think the reason we moved that to phase 3, the organizational structure and alignment, is once they've gone through and reviewed some of the other aspects of the department, it was because we did move that from phase 1 to phase 3, because we want them to have a good idea of our processes, and then to have time to survey other counties across the country that are similar size and that have a similar structure, so that they're able to then give us an assessment, so that if we need to put together a proposal with the BOC to request more staff, then they will have a better idea after going through the first 2 phases. And that was one of the reasons for that. And plus, we wanted to make sure that we had for phase 1 the poll worker training and voter education going forward because of SB 202 both and absentee by mail, chain of custody. We wanted to make those priorities as well ahead of the November election.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the discussion on that. Were there any other questions, Mr. Wingate? You specifically mentioned this one as a top agenda item. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to ask.
No, I guess that, you know, I'd asked a couple of questions of the director before this. I guess one of the things is that I understood from his response that, you know, in terms of this RFP process and the scope of it itself, that the board has actually no involvement in that process. I think that's probably the correct way to do this, and we remain in the role that we have. I guess, you know, in terms of the scope of this and the in any process like this, it's at least some of us have probably been through in our careers. You know, when you bring in consultants like this, it's going to be, you know, certainly have an impact on the current permanent staff, because they're going to have to be, you know, thoroughly involved in answering a lot of questions and helping in the, you know, the procedural aspects of it. So you know, I guess my last question to this is, and it may not be answerable at this point, is that with all of that going on, and maybe thank goodness we have the municipal elections this year, that's front and center. Is that, you know, are we potentially then going to be sometime well into 2022 before not only the results of this work are accentuated, but also then incorporated and inducted into whatever processes and changes to those processes that come out of this? And I think with the so-called continuing impact and evaluation of SB 202, there's obviously, in my humble opinion, there's going to be a lot of work going on here that, you know, clearly has to be abided by. And I'm just, you know, hoping as we have each monthly meeting, or those involved in the monthly meetings going forward, you know, that there is, you know, proper updating to that, and the realistic nature of where we're at in the process. Because, you know, this group, whoever this is that's going to be awarded this contract, is, you know, they're going to be, you know, trying to, I guess, help not only in the manifestation of process, but, you know, making sure that that's correct in what the approach is. So it looks like it could be for the department's staff, it could be a tumultuous time, because there's going to be a lot going on, it wouldn't seem to me as.
I think there would be you know, once it's awarded, we would have a standing agenda item to review what's happened each month going forward.
And the impacts of that, Director, just so that, you know, from an oversight standpoint, we can at least be as somewhat educated, you know, a day in advance, if you will, as typically happens, you know, as to what the impacts of that are. And I would just, you know, pour upon you all to make sure that you stay on top of that, so that there's not, you know, any notions of concern out there amongst voterland.
Thank you, Mr. Wingate. Dr. Ruth is next. One observation I will make very quickly, though, piggybacking on what he said, and it'll take care of the other item that you wanted to bring up, and that is the work plan timeline that we did the work session on. But obviously, there are a lot of things that are still going to impact that and change along the way, including SB 202, as y'all continue to digest that.
Absolutely.
And then any sort of work product that comes out of this consultant. So what I would suggest is that, you know, we were wanting to have that wrapped up into your monthly report, but maybe the other side of, rather than just showing us the Gantt chart, maybe highlighting those areas that are being updated, either because they are no longer on track, or we're having to change the timeline, or it's being impacted by the findings of SB 202 or the consultant. So,
and one thing that we're going to do, last week it was, I think Vernetta asked if we could have, Ms. Nurdin asked if we could have, we're going to give the board access to the Achieve It And we're gonna get the documents necessary uploaded to that in order for the board to be able to go in there and look at those things, be able to do it on their own time to go in there and check on them.
Thank you. Dr. Ruth.
Yes, so the completion of the all of the deliverables from the RFP is April 2022,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And will that be cascaded? So for phase one, is there a timeline for phase one? I'm not sure if I saw that in
We
the
don't
RFP.
have a specific timeline for each one of those, although phase one definitely needs, phase one and phase two, especially phase one, needs to be completed well, in advance of the November election. Phase two, there are different parts of that need to be completed for that election. And then for phase three, part of it, what we want to do is not try to do everything all at once and spread this out. There are certain things we're going to have to be working on as the year goes on. And then as they will look, as the phases go on, they will then look at those pieces that we've either updated through consultations with the state or that the staff has worked on, that we've developed here internally. So they'll be looking at things as they go through. But phase one will definitely be before the November election, and we'll be working on phase two by that point as well.
So I would encourage, before the RFP is published, that there would be completion dates for each of the phases. As it reads now, if the deliverables, all of the deliverables, the completion is April 2022, it doesn't allow you a lot of time to implement those recommendations that are made by the vendor. At least if you have the completion dates for phase one, phase two, and maybe phase three can be April, at least it gives you enough time to implement the recommendations and to take those considerations under advisement as we prepare for the municipal and get ready for a huge election next year with the gubernatorial and Senate race.
Yeah, and the only reason we didn't put specific timelines in there for each one of the phases right now is because I think once the vendor's chosen, we wanted to sit down with the vendor, have them review what we wanted to do, and then try to have them give us some advice on how long they think it will take each one of them to go through each one of these items. And we don't know how big the staff is going, the groups that are going to, or vendors that will bid for this, we need to see what their staff size is as well. But yeah, I can talk to Felicia after this meeting and see if we can put at least some rough deadlines in for each of the phases.
Yeah, even if they're rough and they can still be negotiated as you talk with the vendors and receive their proposals, but I think it would behoove us to put those in there so that we're not in a awkward situation come April 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Ruth. Mr. Wingate.
Yeah, to Dr. Ruth's point, again, once you have a selected vendor in this case, they will, whomever this is, they will assign, I would hope, a project manager.
Yes.
That project manager, as in any project, is going to lay out a timeline, but that's not going to be manifested until sometime after the selection is concluded, before that can even be a document.
Right.
And, again, with numerous years of experience in project management, there's always scope creep, always. You're not going to get away from it, because what you understand day one is not what you're going to realize on day 10. It'll never happen. So let's just all, so we're clear in this, that where it starts and what those projections are will probably not end up that way. So I think, director and staff, that, you know, is to the best you can, and what we have in terms of relative timeframes, as Dr. Ruth pointed out, for 2022, that based on that, that is the April 2022 timeline something, regardless of what transpires in terms of the project, does that have to be an end date to those activities simply because of the nature of the ongoing elections that come, you know, after that April date?
Yeah, and I think because of the May general primary, that's why we selected April as being the end date. Now, if you know, I guess that's flexible, and what purchasing has said is that you can negotiate extensions of those types of things as we go on, if we're finding that we need a little more time. But I think, yeah, we'll go ahead and put some rough dates in there, and before that goes out today.
Or even at a minimum, just inserting into phase 1 and phase 2, your intent that you want the findings to be in time for implementation by November. I mean, that at least signals that, hey, we're accelerating these, but we have to have enough runway to be able to implement what the recommendations come.
Okay, we can do that.
That's great comments. Other questions or comments on the RFP? The last item, Mr. Wingate, you had was regarding open records requests. And so what I had asked, and what I understand the new protocol to be, is that anytime the department receives an open request, open records request, that is also reflected in the monthly reports, so that we know what has come in, and then we also can follow what the responses are. I didn't, and then that they're done in a timely fashion. I didn't know if there was any additional, and I will assume that since there were none reflected in the monthly report, that we did not receive any this particular month. Mr. Wingate, I didn't know if there was anything else more specific you wanted to jump into with that, or any other action items that you were recommending.
No, Mr. Wan, I again, you know, to specificity, no, I'm not going, you know, I don't feel comfortable divulging those that have contacted me concerning, you know, the either non-response or the untimely response of certain ORRs. I think some of us know, you know, on the record, as well as court record, you know, some of the, you know, the confusion or exasperation, I guess, in some cases have come by. And again, I'm not taking up, it's not my job to take up, you know, those personal causes or otherwise, just from a departmental standpoint, that, you know, there certainly are laws that govern responses to ORRs, and they can be invalid as well as valid. I think we all understand that. So what I have heard, and it caused me to ask the question, was probably more inquiries directly to me than I would have ever thought would have come on that issue. But nevertheless, they did come, and that was the purpose of my question or comment too, is that, you know, we do have proper recording of when those ORRs are requested. And as you stated, Mr. Wan, that we're at least being given then what the response is. If it's no, we're not doing this, then I just think a simple why, because it was outside the guide or whatever it might be. But just so that we've got, you know, because if I get that question, if I've got something I can look at, I can say without, you know, looking the fool that I am, that I can give some kind of a proper response as to why an action was taken.
Yeah, I think this is important, and that's why I wanted to build in this process, at least, that hopefully can reveal, or, you know, like you say, we can trace back when we get specific inquiries, but at least I think, you know, for transparency, but then also just so that we're in the know. I'm hoping this new procedure will catch that. But if we find that it doesn't and that we need to tighten that up, then let's continue to explore that. But
yeah, and if that, yes, and to your point, I think if that can become inclusive,
yeah.
And I do understand too, and I did bring this up to Mariska yesterday, the day before, that evidently so far this year we have not posted any of the operation meetings, reports, minutes, and that have not been posted yet for voters to be able to review. But hopefully we can get that corrected. And if that information is part of that reporting process going forward, that I would hope to think would resolve, any and all questions that, voters or any other interested parties may have for that.
Great. Thank you.
Chairman Wan, for the open records request, and currently 2 were paused because the requester has not provided enough information, and 2 are pending. For the future open records request, I can provide that information in the monthly report.
That'd be great. Thank you. And then I think as we were talking about, hopefully that will resolve some of the transparency or question issues going forward, but that hopefully the process will catch that. So thank you for that update. Mr. Johnson, I saw you had a comment or question.
A quick question for the staff. Doesn't the county attorney's office has an open request division maybe, or an attorney that's responsible for open request, making sure that various departments are in compliance?
That's correct.
Yes, Mariska is the open records officer for our department, and then she works with the county attorney's office on responding to those. And I think there were some questions last year, especially in 2020. And Mariska can give probably better statistics than me, but I believe at one point leading up to the November election, probably within a couple weeks of the November election and just past it, we received about 36 open records requests. And there was, between the November election, the December election, and the January election, it was really hard for staff to prepare for those elections and then to also respond as timely as we usually do to some of those open records requests. And so what we ended up doing in some instances is we told people that they would receive a full response by a certain date, and a lot of them were posted for January so that we could get some breathing room from the elections. Only 3 counties in the state had the September and December elections, and we were one of them. So where some counties probably had some breathing room between November and January, we didn't have that luxury. I don't know if my number's correct, Mariska, but I thought I remembered the 30 some came in right around that November election.
I don't recall the number, but it was constant. And it was actually during an election. It is difficult to respond to open records requests while we're in election mode. And so the time is always extended. It always has been. And it's just this year that it's been an issue.
Mr. Johnson, did you have anything else?
No, that's it for me. I just wanted to clarify that we do have an attorney in the office that's responsible for monitoring an attorney in the county that's responsible for monitoring the open records request. And I just know that dealing with them sometimes, the response rate in what you can actually do is not always what people want, but just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
No, that's fair. I mean, I think I'm just coming at it as I think we as board members would like to know if there's something out there so that if we get approached by a voter, by anybody else, we're not caught off guard like, oh, I didn't realize that this ask was out there even, or being able to, I want us to have also the ability to infer what some folks might be trying to get at with the request so that we're prepared as well. But yeah, this isn't meant, and Ms. Boson, this wasn't meant as any sort of kind of criticism. I think it's just, for.
I didn't take it that way, sir.
All right, just making sure. Any other comments on that particular topic or on the monthly report? Okay. If not, that moves us to the next item on the agenda, and that's item 5 under old business, the bylaws amendment. Mr. Wingate, I believe this is your request to have this brought up.
Let me, boy, with all of the other activities I have, let me. No, did I? I get, I think we start off with 3 or 4 bylaw amendments. Can you just, for my edification, which one did we end up actually changing that is being incorporated into an updated set of bylaws?
So I will have to lean on Rick and Ms. Bodison on this, but I understand
I've lost track. I'm sorry. I've just lost track.
Public comment was one that was updated and changed. That was the one that stuck out in my mind in terms of
Article 3, Section 4, public comment.
What did that cover? Did that cover the public comment piece?
Yes.
Okay. And that was the only one that was actually moved forward, correct?
And the others then that were in consideration, those have been removed from consideration?
That's at the last meeting, we talked about 2 of them, and there were no motions to amend that were brought forward. So there was no action taken.
And again, I know Mr. Johnson thinks I'm picking on him, and please trust me, I'm not. But I think in terms of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Attorney Mr. Lohman had indicated in terms of us all as board members and then being gainfully employed by elected officials, that should be a discussion in an executive session, as I recall. Am I incorrect in that assumption?
Yeah, if you go back and look at the minutes, he said that the county had reviewed it, the law department had reviewed it and found no issue with it.
Okay.
And that one, I think it was Dr. Ruth's suggestion was that perhaps we insert a section into our bylaws that more explicitly discusses what constitutes conflicts of interest. And that Mr. Lohman was going to help draft that. And I have not seen any language from him.
And Mr. Chair, this is David Lohman.
Yes.
It is my understanding that Mrs. Ringer is working on that language. And my understanding is it will be language that will track along with the actual code of ethics. So that will be something that she can provide, and then we can have further discussion. I think we need executive session today.
Okay, that's satisfactory. And to me, that's satisfactory as long as proper authorities, in this case, the attorney, staff, ethics, whoever that is making that determination. And I would hope to think that the board is comfortable with that. Again, there was never any accusations being made. It was just, when this comes up, let's take a look at it. And I think the record will reflect, that was the issue here. So again, I hope that, through that process, if that be the case and that's what's found, then so be it. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Wingate. Were there any other items regarding the bylaws that any board member wanted to bring forward at this point? Okay, if not, then we'll continue on with the agenda, which I have since lost my place. Moves us to new business. The first item is approval to remove registered voters with non-residential addresses. Mr. Barron, I'll turn this back over to you to walk us through this.
Ralph is gonna be
okay
handling this item. Mr. Jones.
Good morning, board. Yes, when we discovered that we had some people who are registered at post office boxes, we have set out.
Ralph, they're not post office boxes.
I mean, not post office, mail boxes. We set out to send letters out to find out their registration. And we sent out 1,280 mail letters. and we have 65 people who have updated their registration and respond to our requests. Our recommendation is that we will remove 1,215 voters from the roll due to not having a residence address. That will be our recommendation for the board. We would appreciate your decision on it.
All right, is there any discussion or questions from board members regarding the request from Mr. Jones on the voter list maintenance action? All right, seeing none, we'll need a motion. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Wingate. Yes, I didn't see you.
Real quickly, the 1,280 Chief, that you sent out, these were directed at those that do not have what we found to be a valid address.
Physical, what we did, these 1,280s are actually at places like a mailbox, etc.
Right.
Are some deemed that we know for a fact are not residential addresses. It's only a box that a person will receive their mail.
Right.
And so we've identified those places. And once we have identified those places, we went through and tried to bank it up against the voter file to make sure that every voter who were registered at those particular locations will get a letter so that they can understand it. And
yes, this was action that your department took in making the determinations that we had on our voter registration file. These showed up as being addresses that had box or something to that effect in the address line.
Yes, I think we got a call from a voter, and we researched the whole county after we received that information.
Okay. So on the entire voter file of 850-some thousand, we found 1,280 that had box in the address line.
No, the address itself looks like a regular address. It's 123 Peachtree Road, box 23. It looks like a regular address. You couldn't tell by the way the address physically looked. To us, it looks like a regular address, like an apartment. So that's why it was kind of allowed to go through, because it seems like a regular address. It wasn't registered as a box 23, Atlanta, Georgia. You know, obviously, if that's the case, we know for a fact in our procedures that a letter will have to be generated at that point. But they actually had a address and a box after that one, which is looks like a valid address if you don't know the actual places.
Ralph, essentially what these are voters that are registered at businesses. It's a mailboxes, etc. in many cases, or some similar type business. And we've asked the voters. Ralph went to county attorney's office and asked them about generating a letter, whether we can do this, and then we would generate a letter, send it out, would go to these voters, it would tell them that they need to register at a physical address rather than just this business address, which is a mailbox. And then we would bring that, whoever responded to it and updated their address with a physical address, we would then be able to, we would have a physical address for those. Then going forward, these addresses are, Ralph said, will be flagged, prevent people from registering at those addresses in lieu of a physical address, or like a the USPS post office box that is usually tied to a physical address. Correct, Ralph?
That is correct.
Okay. All right, so that was the trigger. Chief, of the 1,280 that you sent, were there any returned undeliverable?
I don't know about that one. Haven't researched that one. We can do that for you if that's.
Well, no, you know, you got enough to do. That my question, you know, is, and I think properly answered, that no, you're not aware that any of the 1,280 were returned undeliverable. You know, it's to your knowledge,
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, other questions or comments? I have one quick one. So once this approval is done by the board and the action is taken, say someone comes back and says, wait a minute, you know, that was done incorrectly, or I want to, they basically just need to go start the voter registration process over, correct?
That is correct. We will actually send out another mailing for the ones who have been removed off the road, telling them they were removed off the road for hearing. But yes, all they have to do is re-register.
Yep. Okay. All right. Okay. If there's no further discussion, is there a motion from one of the board members to approve the removed registered voters with non-residential addresses?
So moved.
The motion from Mr. Wingate. Is there a second? I'll second it. It's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Or Dr. Ruth seconded. All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
All right.
Any opposed? Please note that Mr. Johnson voted against that, and any abstention.
Oh, I said aye.
You were yes. Oh, you're okay.
Yes.
I said aye.
Yes.
All right. All right. Any opposed or any abstentions? Not that motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Sorry about that, Mr. Johnson.
No.
All right. The next item under new business is list maintenance audit, and that was also an item requested by Mr. Wingate.
Yeah, I would say from the discussion we've had, even as of today, in my opinion, we can move on. I think that we've probably hit that, you know, as much up as we possibly can at this stage, you know, but again, I will just reiterate, I think for, you know, many, just making sure that all of the list management functions we have are, you know, properly evaluated in this process and proceduralized and administered and trained upon, so that they're, you know, my hope is going forward for, you know, this department, this county, that it's maintained with the utmost efficiency. So I have no reason to believe under the circumstances that that's not the case at this point. And I'm very hopeful that the process going here forward will, you know, make that something that we can have faith in. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we covered everything that you had asked for.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
There are a couple of items that we are now, it sounds like we need to go into executive session to cover. They're mostly, they're all legal items. Just to kind of confer, it's a follow-up from some of the items from last month's executive session regarding legal matters as well. So with that, I will entertain a motion from a board member to go into executive session, and board members, you should have a link for that.
Amber,
Yes.
I'm sorry. I resent the link at about 9:45, only because I didn't want you all to be in a waiting room again.
Yeah,
okay.
Thanks for doing that. I appreciate
Well, I'll make the motion that we move into executive session.
Okay.
Second.
Motion from Mr. Wingate, second from Madam Vice Chair. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That motion carries unanimously. Okay, so we will move from this meeting into executive session, then return to complete this meeting once that's over. Thank you.
Alex, do you want me in this one or not?
Yeah, I think it's fine. It's okay. You were in the beginning conversation last time on these similar topics. So yes, I would say yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're on mute, Chairman.
Sorry about that. I'll entertain a motion to return to regular session
So moved.
by Mr. Johnson, seconded by
Wingate.
Wingate. All in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That motion carries unanimously. And I am noting that we have not gotten Dr. Ruth back just yet. Colleagues, before we adjourn or move to accept a motion to adjourn, I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about our June meeting. While the Board of Commissioners has elected to go back to in-person meetings, the boards, as I understand it, are still covered under the Emergency Act, and we have the option, but not expectation or requirement to go back to in-person. So for our June meeting, I wanted to at least pose to the group and just see what the will of the board is. Obviously, we did meet in person for the work session is kind of a first test run, but I didn't know what everyone's level of comfort is yet going to a full board meeting for June, or if we want to continue to wait and see follow other board members as they slowly return as well. Any thoughts or comments on that, Mr. Johnson?
To me, it doesn't matter either way, whether we do it in person or remain virtual. But one of the things that was mentioned is that we're still under emergency order. I thought that it ended on
April 30th.
Yeah, April 30th.
Well, I need to confirm that was what was previously done, and I don't know if what Governor Kemp's actions were or weren't specifically on that.
Yeah, we need to, and again, it doesn't matter to me, but I just think that we need to be clear, because I thought, just like as obviously Ms. Nuridan just mentioned, that the order was lifted, and I don't want to say the floodgates are open, but I'll just say that, we're almost open again.
Yeah.
And if we can remain virtual and that's the will of the board, I'm fine with that.
Any colleagues, do y'all have any other thoughts or opinions on that? Yeah, Mr. Wingate, please.
I have felt like that this virtual or Zoom meeting works very well. And, of course, I live about 3 days away from the city of Atlanta. So obviously, my opinion is going to differ from the rest of you. But I just find, from the standpoint of everything that I keep here in my home office, it gives me reference to, my computers and everything else in case there's a question, something pops into my mind that I hear or otherwise. I just find this to be it's a pleasant, easy working environment. And for one, right now, I just feel like, we continue on with the virtuals because I think it works pretty well.
Okay. Ms. Norden or Dr. Ruth, any thoughts here? Or?
Well, I'm excited and saddened that the June meeting will be my last meeting, but I want to do it virtually. So as far as June goes, I vote to do it virtually.
And Dr. Ruth, any feelings either way?
I don't have any feelings either way. I mean, I'm fine coming in person. I sometimes prefer it, but we can vote on it. How many, Aaron, Mr. Johnson, what were your thoughts about virtual or?
This is just for June, right?
Yeah, only June.
Only June. Uh-huh. Yeah, it didn't matter to me one way or the other. I'm like you, in person is always greater, but I understand that we're still easing back into regular life. So if we did one more in, virtual and then started July or however, I'm fine with that.
The July, correct me if I'm wrong, but the July meeting will also will require the swearing in.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Component. So maybe along with that, we resume in July, make June virtual, and anything else make July go back to the in-person meetings.
Well,
Or we
I-
can,
yeah.
you all can go the in-person and I'll just join in via Zoom. You know, I could make that work as well. If in fact that all goes forward, but that's just a, you know, proposition. Let's, we can finish out June and the business of that. And then, you know, other things take place in July as we just discussed.
Well, let's do this. Let's go ahead and just so that we're on, let's go ahead and just entertain a motion to that effect. And let's add the condition though. I will work with staff to make sure that the emergency order or changes thereof don't mandate something different from what we're proposing, which is virtual in June, and then resumption of in-person in July. So can someone just put forward a motion, since I can't as the chair?
I'll move that motion you
Okay.
just recited on.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Wingate. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Madam Vice Chair. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. All right. If that concludes our agenda items, unless there's anything else board members wanted to bring up for discussion. If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
That was a unanimous motion. A unanimous second.
Yes.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Thanks for a great meeting.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.